Hello everyone. So what I have here is a Buster Keaton Masters of Cinema Blu-ray, and as you can see there's 3 different films on it. So there's Sherlock Jr., The General and Steamboat Bill Jr. I've already done a review of 2 of them, Sherlock Jr. and The General, so in this video I'll be reviewing Steamboat Bill Jr. So Steamboat Bill Jr., it's a silent film starring Buster Keaton and it came out in 1928. And in this film we have a man known as Steamboat Bill who is in charge of this paddle steamer on this river, and he has an assistant with him as well. And then we also have this guy known as Mr. King who also owns a paddle steamer, but this paddle steamer is much more luxurious, it's much bigger and it's much more expensive. Steamboat Bill is quite annoyed with Mr. King coming in and sort of showing off and taking over this area. It then happens that Steamboat Bill has a letter from his son who he hasn't seen for a long time, and now he's hoping that his son is going to be really big and strong and is going to be able to help him out run his paddle steamer. It then later turns out that his son is Buster Keaton and is a bit clumsy, a bit stupid and perhaps not really that helpful after all. Then we also have Mr. King's daughter who is called Kitty, and then we sort of have this romance and love story between Kitty and Buster Keaton's character Willie, who is also known in this film as Steamboat Bill Jr. But really the plot itself doesn't actually really focus on this part of the film, because like a lot of Buster Keaton films there's lots of silly things that happen, there's lots of slapstick moments, and it builds up to this scene later where there is this massive cyclone which is taking place in town. And this film is really filled with lots of bizarre antics, and as such, in a lot of ways, the plot is really silly. But as with a lot of silent films, as I was saying, obviously, because it's a silent film, sometimes a story has to be a little bit silly, a little bit wacky, in order to actually get the audience's attention and make it worth watching. And this was the first time that I'd seen this film, and I have to say, I was impressed with it. I knew what to expect because I'd seen the other 2 Buster Keaton films, The General and Sherlock Jr. And this one is also really funny and really excellent. Only about 70 minutes long, so fairly nice running time. And it was just entertaining the whole way through. And Buster Keaton has such presence on screen and he's always just worth watching. He always grabs my attention whenever he's on screen, even though he always has that stone cold face, that really expressionless face. It's always in the body language, the way he reacts to things, and there's also lots of stunts that he does in this film where he's jumping over things or when he's climbing up ropes and things like that, and it's all very impressive. One of the most iconic scenes in this film is actually when this cyclone is taking place and there's lots of buildings falling down, there's lots of things collapsing, and really the whole town is becoming a bit of a ruin. And Buster Keaton's character Willie, he is standing outside this house and the house falls flat on him, or almost, and it turns out that Buster Keaton, he manages to just escape it because a space where a window would be falls on top of him, so he just escapes it. And it's one of the most iconic scenes in the film, and it's really amazing to watch because you think that this was done for real life obviously, and that had it had gone wrong, Buster Keaton could have really got badly injured or even killed. If I am to compare Steamboat Bill Jr. to the films Sherlock Jr. and The General, I'd probably honestly say that this is my least favourite of the 3, but that's no bad thing because The General is probably my favourite silent film that I've seen. I think it's a really excellent film, and Sherlock Jr. is also very entertaining, although that film was a bit shorter. If I was to have some complaints about this film, which would be very few, it would probably just be that the story is a little bit all over the place. It seems that things tend to happen in a random order and that perhaps it wasn't very well structured. Perhaps, but really that's a minor complaint, and like I was saying with a lot of these silent films, you can't go in expecting a really complex, well thought out story, because obviously being a silent film we have these cards pop up sometimes with the dialogue on them when characters are saying something, and it all has to be fairly straightforward and it has to be entertaining in order to grab our attention and to make the film worth watching. So this was actually Buster Keaton's last independently made silent film before he signed a contract with MGM and he went to do on films like The Cameraman. But really, this is one of his last proper successful films, and unfortunately in a few years after this, Buster Keaton's career really started to go downhill and he really never captured that stardom again, as obviously movies went from being silent to talkies, which unfortunately didn't play too well for Buster Keaton. But nevertheless, watching Buster Keaton's films is always entertaining, and I'm hoping to at some point watch some more of his work. Obviously most of his films were in the 1920s. That was really an excellent decade for Buster Keaton, doing all these different silent films. I must also mention in this film that this film really shows a very good relationship between Buster Keaton's character Willie and his dad Steamboat Bill, and there was a really strong father-son relationship in this film, because at first the father, who is played by Ernest Torrance, given a great performance, he is really fed up of Willie, his son, and you can really see their relationship being tested in this film, especially when Buster Keaton tends to mess everything up. When he's on the boat, there's some funny scenes where he presses a switch and the boat moves and crashes into another boat, and all these silly antics. Basically Buster Keaton messing things up and making things go wrong as usual, really. Overall, I have to say Steamboat Bill Jr. is a fantastic silent film. Though not the best silent film I've seen, it really is still a very entertaining film. So I'm going to give Steamboat Bill Jr. a rating of 8 out of 10. If you like silent films, this is definitely worth a watch. As I said, I can't say it's the best silent film of all time, so it's not as if I'm saying if you haven't seen any silent films then watch this, because to be honest, if you don't like silent films then this probably isn't going to win you over. But nevertheless, give it a chance, because it's a very enjoyable film, as I said, only about 70 minutes long as well. So there we go. So that is my review of Steamboat Bill Jr. So what do you guys think? Have you seen Steamboat Bill Jr.? Do you like it? Do you dislike it? Please let me know down in the comment section what your thoughts are. Anyway, thank you all very much for watching. I'll see you all in the next video. Take care.